The One Piece world is one giant ocean filled with small islands, right? Well, actually, looking at clues from across the series as well as two major hints from recent chapters, there is in fact a lot to suggest the somewhat mind-boggling possibility that what we see right now is not the true One Piece world at all. Rather, the true One Piece world is in actuality composed of gigantic continents much like our own world. But 800 years ago, a great flood covered up almost all the land in the world, leaving only the islands we see today peeking out above the surface. Not only that, but the finale of One Piece, the reveal of the true nature of the dawn of the world, seems like it may very possibly be the draining of the Great Sea, unveiling a vast, new open world in the uncovered lands below. This newly revealed giant swath of land may be the true One Piece. Sounds too unbelievable? Well, while I am still personally on the train that the One Piece definitely involves the destruction of the Red Line, as seen in this theory that I put out years ago, this new flooded world theory, first brought up by my stream viewer, Red and Silver 741, actually fits perfectly with the already pre-existing popular destruction of the Red Line theory. And while I'm not saying that I definitely believe in the new flooded world addition to this theory, interestingly, I found that the more and more that you look at the pieces of evidence that Oda has been dropping throughout the post-time skip in particular, the more and more credible this shocking flooded world idea seems to be, with hints actually going back all the way to Fishman Island, that the world we see today may only be a glimpse of the true world of One Piece, as the true world has been lost beneath the waves, and can only be uncovered and restored by defeating the gods that rule the world. So stick with me and let me break down all of the signs that seem to be pointing to this potential truth behind the great treasure awaiting us at the end of the story. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe. So to begin with, something interesting happened in chapter 1089. The sea levels of the entire world rose by 1 meter. Now this could very easily be a fairly innocuous idea, maybe just a cool after effect that Oda chose to include after the destruction of Lulusia Kingdom, a way to illustrate the ripple effects of a great calamity and emphasize how even a small flex of power by the world government affects the entire planet. However, this after effect of Lulusia Kingdom's destruction does establish the idea that certain effects in the One Piece world can change the sea level of the entire planet, meaning this may have happened in the past to a far greater degree. It's also interesting to consider that the One Piece world itself is strangely dominated by the ocean. There are hardly any significant continents. It's pretty much all small islands on an open ocean. Now, with these facts in mind, there was a very significant reveal that we got at the end of Wano. At the end of that story arc, we learned that the Wano that we had known all along as a land composed of small islands on a large body of water, this was in fact just a small fragment of the true land of Wano. The true, vast land of Wano had been long buried underneath the sea. The Wano that we had been reading about all along was in fact only a small glimpse of the true Wano. There was in fact a far wider and greater land to be uncovered, but the time has simply not yet come for that to happen. Now, we know that the lore of Wano reflects the lore of the broader One Piece world in general in many ways. As it goes, the island of Wano was taken over by a false authority. The kingdom was left with a prophecy that one day the dawn would return to Wano as a will would be passed on, and finally the return of Joy Boy to the land does in fact bring the dawn back to Wano as promised. This is of course pretty much exactly what is happening in the broader world, with the Celestial Dragons having taken over and the Will of D being passed down, the world waiting on Joy Boy's return to bring back the dawn, and so on. So considering how closely the lore of Wano mirrors the lore of the broader One Piece world in general, would it not be possible that the final shocking truth about Wano may in fact have been foreshadowing that very same truth about the One Piece world? I mean, just look at how Oda presented Wano to us. It's such a strangely specific structure that he chose for it. A large body of water with various small islands, each with their own unique cultures and climates, just like the One Piece world. is it possible that it's not just Wano's lore that is meant to mirror the broader One Piece world, but the true nature of the land of Wano as well? If Wano is a great land that has been lost to the sea, made to look like only islands remain, then could that hint at the truth of the One Piece world as well? That this world we see of various little islands on a giant body of water is in actuality hiding far greater stretches of land that have been lost to the sea. Now, the reason Wano came to be this way was, of course, because of flooding. And in the broader narrative of One Piece, Oda has already made allusions to the story of a great flood, going all the way back to Fishman Island. Oda has many biblical references throughout the series, of course, and one of the most prominent ones that we got in Fishman Island was Noah, a great ark named after the story of Noah and the great biblical flood that covered the world. Fishman Island was also the ark that Oda first started referencing the idea of a new world that would be born, where everyone would be able to enjoy the light of the sun. The question is that idea of a new world just symbolic or literal? Could the entirety of One Piece be heading towards a very literal new world? One where the sea levels are lowered again, unveiling a far greater and perhaps more interconnected mass of land for everyone to enjoy. See, this idea is enticing to me for many reasons, as many small pieces of the story come together. For instance, this poneglyph that was strangely found under the sea during Jinbei's cover story, inside some completely unexplained underwater ancient ruins. To be very clear, Oda never explained what these ancient ruins under the water were. They are not for fishermen or mermaids, and they are very clearly not built by or for sea beasts. It's just that today sea beasts have found these ancient ruins and chosen to sleep in them, but at the end of the day, these are the ruins of some ancient city that still has no explanation. Why would an ancient, seemingly man-made city be deep underwater, and why would a poneglyph be there? What's even more interesting is that Oda almost never shows us the depths of the ocean. Beyond the Fishman Island arc, the only time we really got to see much of what's going on under the seas was during Jinbei's cover story, and it's centered around Jinbei finding mysterious ancient ruins. It's entirely possible that there are plenty more ancient ruins of past kingdoms littered throughout the ocean underneath the waters that Oda just hasn't shown us, all of them having been submerged by a great flood in the past. Here's another point that has yet to be explained. When Roger heard the story of Joy Boy, he laughed, and he specifically said that he wished that he could have lived during Joy Boy's time. Why? Why did Roger wish he could have lived during Joy Boy's time instead of this one? What was so different about the world that Joy Boy inhabited? Was it just the fact that the ancient kingdom had advanced technology, or that the world government didn't yet exist? Would those points have been enough for Roger to have wished that he could have lived in Joy Boy's time instead of today's? Or could it have been the fact that in Joy Boy's era, the world itself was different? There was an entire vast open world of land to explore, a true unbound world of freedom that Roger in today's age can never experience. Roger today can only ever visit the remaining little islands that have been left behind. Again, I personally have always subscribed to the idea that the One Piece was the reconnecting of all the world's oceans through the destruction of the Red Line. But now I begin to question whether or not that is a different enough world that Roger would have wished that he could have lived back in that era. After all the islands would still be separated by the sea. It would have just been a more connected sea than we have today. So what if the answer is grander than that? What if the One Piece is not one giant connected ocean, but rather one giant connected land? A new world for everyone to share in harmony, instead of being separated into tiny islands across this huge ocean. This also ties back to ideas from both Water 7 and Skypiea. To begin with, Wano is actually not the only island with a lore centered around flooding and being lost to the ocean. Water 7 was the first island where we learned it was slowly being lost to the ocean over time, and this was where the idea of the need to connect the people of various islands became so important. The sea train was the solution, but ultimately this whole conflict points out a flaw of the world, that everyone is separated by the vast, harsh ocean. A more unified one would be one with more connected land. and much easier travel. Interestingly, Water 7, the arc that first presented the idea of islands being slowly lost to the ocean due to rising sea level, was also the first arc that the evils of the world government were revealed. Two separate ideas, but both introduced in the same arc, perhaps deliberately. Even more interestingly, we can look back at the story of Skypiea, an arc that continues to prove to be a goldmine of foreshadowing for the rest of the story. In Skypiea, the true treasure that was being fought over was literally land. Verth itself is simply Earth, but god Enel had taken Earth away from everyone else and claimed it for himself. The happy ending of Skypiea was when everyone was returned this giant piece of Earth to all share with each other and live together in harmony. That Earth was the true treasure of the Skypiea arc all along, and in the end it was the treasure that everyone, all races and people, were all gifted to share. In that same vein, what if Roger's final gift, the final treasure that he left behind for everyone, was the same thing? One giant piece of Earth, a new world for everyone to share. That land, all of it is there in one piece. Now the big question everyone watching has right now would be how? How would all this be possible? How would the world have been flooded, and how would the flood be drained at the end of the story? Well, in my opinion, it all comes down to the red line. We all know that if you have a body of water and suddenly insert a large mass into it, then the water level will rise much higher than what it was before. So what if the red line is not a natural mass of land? I'm not even talking about terraforming, I'm saying what if the red line was artificially created? Perhaps through some extraordinarily powerful devil fruit ability. The sudden creation of a large mass of Earth that previously did not exist would of course cause the entire ocean to flood over as sea levels would drastically rise. Now, this is of course very speculative, but I do believe it's very possible that Imu may have such a fruit. Unfortunately, that full theory is way too long to include into this video, so most of my argument for that will have to be saved for later. All I will say is that many existing popular theories, such as the creation of the All Blue and the destruction of the Red Line, already point to the idea that the Red Line may have been artificially created during the Void Century to restrict the freedom of the world. Symbolically, it also makes sense, as the Celestial Dragons now get to conveniently rule from the top of the world on the Red Line, and have tremendous control over who is able to pass between. Now, going along this hypothetical, if the Red Line were an artificially created landmass that flooded the ocean, it would make the most sense as being Imu's ability, as we now know that whatever destroyed the Lucia Kingdom was not Imu's personal ability, but rather some sort of a weapon, with a very good chance of it having been the ancient weapon Uranus. As such, if the Red Line were not created by an ancient weapon, it would be very possibly have been something created by Imu himself. Again, speculative, I understand, but Imu and the Red Line, it just has to be a separate video for another day. Just humor me for the moment and consider the possibility that Imu created the Red Line, because it would be incredibly fitting, since as we know, the defeat of a Devil Fruit user completely undoes the effects of their Devil Fruit abilities, as we see with Doflamingo's Birdcage, Kaido's Flame Clouds, Sugar's Toys, Moria's Shadows, and so on. This would set up a perfect finale to the end of One Piece. If, theoretically, Imu's power allowed him to artificially create a giant mass of land, the Red Line, which subsequently flooded the entire world, thereby covering up the vast majority of it and forcing everyone below to live on the tiny islands remaining that still peeked over the surface of the new sea level. Well then, as most of us imagine the final battle of One Piece to be Luffy defeating Imu, then in the very process of Luffy dealing that final blow and defeating Imu, Imu's Devil Fruit ability would disappear, meaning that with Luffy's final victory over God, the Red Line would fade away, and water levels across the world would drastically drop. As God is defeated, the great flood that he created would be drained, and just as the world is freed from his control, so too would everyone be able to look upon a vast new world that has been returned to them. Whatever existed in One Piece till now, millions of people and all these races separated and split up across small islands on a seemingly endless and dangerous ocean, that was but a shadow of the true world that once was. Once Imu is defeated, the Red Line is removed, and the Great Flood is drained, everyone would be able to look upon what is truly the dawn of a new world. Interestingly, this idea that Imu has been depriving people of land all along also mirrors what Enel did in Skypiea. Enel hoarded the Verth for himself, which would be much like how the Red Line, as a gigantic continent of land, exists only for Imu and the Celestial Dragons, the gods of the world, while everyone else is confined to small islands because the existence of the Red Line caused a flood that has essentially robbed everyone else of the world of land. The Holy Castle of the Celestial Dragons is literally even called Pangaea Castle. But really, the final reason that I find this to be the most poetic ending to the story of One Piece would be that in the process of draining the flood, uncovering the lost land, and bringing the dawn of a vast new world, Luffy would truly be ending the old world and the old era in a way that no other ending of One Piece would. Because with the draining of the flood, we would no longer be looking at a world dominated by a vast, unforgiving sea. The sea would still exist, of course, but more in the way that the sea exists for us in the real world today. It would be nowhere near as all-encompassing as it currently is in the One Piece world, because this whole new world of land would have just been uncovered. As such, that would mean that this great age of pirates that we have been in for so long would finally come to an end. A completely new age, unlike any that has ever come before, would begin. It would be a fundamentally different type of world, no longer dictated by ships and sailing and traversing great stretches of water. Now, a new chapter in the history of the world begins. There would be no Pirate King after Luffy, because Luffy would be the Pirate King to end the age of pirates. So while this whole flood idea is a wild possibility, and I still personally lean towards the tamer idea of just the destruction of the Red Line, I still find the idea of a great flood and the unearthing of a whole new world to be a more romantic and powerful potential addition to that existing theory. The destruction of the land of the gods, the removal of the existence of the Red Line, returning the land below to the ordinary people and races that inhabit the world, so that everyone can share that one giant piece of land in harmony. In doing so, this brings together all the themes and ideas and hints throughout the story, a great treasure in one piece, the dawn of a new world and a future where everyone, all people and races, could live together, no longer separated by the vast seas. So let me know in the comments below if that type of an ending sounds appealing to you. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe, and you can get my extended thoughts on evidence from Dressrosa regarding the Great Flood in my weekly podcast by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below.